Hello, people. People of the internet. People of outer space. People from New York and California. People from Jupiter. Today we're talking about the Bellari passive preamplifier, which is a bit of a misnomer because it doesn't amplify anything because it's passive. Let's talk about this thing. So, I guess we should maybe talk about preamplifiers and why a passive preamplifier is different than a active preamplifier. So in an active preamplifier, they probably come in two flavors. You have one that just has a buffer to maintain line level, and then you have other ones that actually add gain into the signal, so it's boosting the signal when it goes into your power amplifier. This does none of that. This has nothing to, you can't plug it in because there's nothing to plug in other than RCA cables. That's it. You have 4 options and then your output. And then you have your selector switch to switch between the 4 and a volume, and that's all you have. You have a volume pot, a switch to change between the connections and the connectors. That's all it does. And then you have one here. I guess that's also 4. If you have this plugged in, then probably the RCAs don't work on the back. Or maybe they do. I don't know. I didn't bother to try that. I'm sure it works fine. So why would you want something like this? Well, they're cheap. This thing is like $100. It's made in the USA by Bellari. That I think is a company. I don't know who owns who. I think Rolls owns Bellari, or maybe Bellari owns Rolls. They make a lot of stuff. They make stuff in this red and gold tacky looking color scheme. I don't know why they chose that. It wouldn't have been the choice that I would have made, but here we are. So what this does is it just basically, you have this, and you're just using that to attenuate the amount of signal going to your power amplifier, and then you have your devices that you can choose. The thing is heavy. It is heavy. Heavy. Quality-wise, that doesn't feel great. It doesn't look... I opened this up, too, to see what's going on, like, next to nothing. This feels real not great. This feels like this is going to wear out, for sure, at some point. Just because they built the amplifier in America doesn't mean that these pots are made in America. So I used this with 3 different power amplifiers. I used it with the Schiit Vidar, which sounded horrible, quite frankly. I did not like the sound of it at all. It sounded grainy and harsh, which is not how I would describe that power amplifier at all, but that's what it made it sound like. I was like, But honestly, that wasn't what I bought that for anyway, but I wanted to test it. I also tested it with a Dynaco ST70 that I've purchased recently, even though if you've ever watched my one video for the A55TP integrated amplifier, I said I was never buying another tube power amplifier again in my life. I lied. I bought another one like a week later. And it sounded interesting. I struggled to describe the sound to you of that. That sounded really in your face, really, really kind of interesting. What I did find that it sounded very ear fatiguing, at least with my setup. It didn't sound bad. It kind of sounded good, kind of also amazing, but then also kind of like a headache. So I don't know what to say about that. And then, so I tried it with the amplifier that I actually bought this thing for, and that would have been the Elite80 made by Ideal Innovations, which is, I guess, technically a integrated amplifier because it has volume pots for each channel. I would assume that that's a passive preamp in that as well. But then it only has one input. So I wanted to try this with that to see if this would work with that. Because when I tried the Noob Sound 12AX7 preamp, it did not sound good. It sounded like it was really distorting and hitting that front end too hard and causing it to not sound great. I did some mods to that amplifier. It had linear pots for the volume pots, which, if you know anything about the nerdy science of potentiometers with volume, it's usually best to use what's called a logarithmic pot. Linear pot, if you look at like the graph, it's like this. It's just a diagonal. As you turn it up, it goes up an equal amount. Well, the logarithmic, it kind of goes up exponentially as you get to the end, which will give you a cleaner sweep of the volume. So I installed those, and I think that really, really, really helps that amp a lot. And it's a good sounding amp to begin with, but it makes it way more flexible. Because really what happens with those linear pots is you turn it up a little bit and you're practically, for all intents and purposes, you're there. You're already as high as you're going to be able to get out of that thing. So I don't know to what degree this helped or if changing the pots helped. But so using this with that, this sounded really good. It's not neutral. You would think it would be neutral, but I did find that it added a little bit of low end to it. Not a lot, but something worth mentioning. Highs seemed the same. It just seemed to add a little bit more low end, and I guess maybe that makes sense. Because maybe this is adding some capacitance, maybe? I don't know. I don't have an explanation. If you have an explanation, put it down there, because I don't have one. But that's just what I heard. And maybe my ears suck. They definitely suck. They're not great. I mean, I can hear things that a lot of people can't hear, but then, like, I don't know. I have tinnitus. I played in rock bands a lot with very loud guitar amps. So they're kind of burnt out. What was my point? Oh, I don't know. So yeah, it seemed to add bass to me. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it was an illusion. Maybe it was remembering wrong within the 30 seconds it took me to hook this thing up. But if you're in the market for this, Schiit offers one that is in this sort of footprint. Doesn't say Manny on it, but it's like similarly has a similar footprint to this. It's called the SYS, S-Y-S, and it's got the only benefit of this one versus the Schiit one is that the SYS only has two. It has like a button like 1 and 2 versus being able to do multiples like this one. They should upgrade the SYS to the SYS 2 and make it a little bit higher, maybe a double height. And I realize that they're probably the reason why a lot of their stuff is so cheap is because a lot of, like, all of these probably use very similar boxes where fabrication becomes a lot cheaper. And so fabricating that would probably make it more expensive because right now the SYS is $50. This is $100. This is $50. Not this. This is $150. This is the Manny 2. I'm going to move this so the SYS being cheaper, but then you have less options. So if you can get away with only having 2 inputs, the SYS is cheaper. Whether or not it's better, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to guess they're probably about the same in terms of sonic and audio, I would think. I can't imagine they're much different because looking at the inside, they look identical. What else do I have to say? Do I have anything else to say about this passive preamplifier other than it's super ugly and the Sis is at least going to look better than this? Bellari, what are you doing with this red and gold color scheme? Like, look how close you are. You can barely see where the knobs are. Not that it matters for the volume, because, like, does anyone really look at that when they're judging the volume? Probably not. They're just like, oh, that's where I want it. But this is kind of important. Like, you might want to see what you're pointing to. But you can't, because it's, I don't know. And I don't want to necessarily take a Sharpie to it, because that's going to look bad. You're probably best off replacing those with something that actually has a, I mean, they just pop off. Replace it with something you could actually see, because you can't really see this little, I mean, you can kind of see it if the light reflects it right. And if you have eyesight that's better than mine, they get, I don't know, it's actually, I don't know. Who knows? Who cares? Why bother? Passive preamps. Interesting. I mean, the good thing about them is they're cheap, so if you want to try one, boom, try it. Not expensive. Not a big investment. Definitely going to sound different than an active preamp, regardless if it has just a buffer or if it actually amplifies. Yeah, that's all I have to say.